A family goes out for a day on the ocean. When they wake up, the entire sea has vanished overnight. Nothing remains but an endless expanse of dry seabed, and their phones have zero signal. Ben releases a balloon into the sky, hoping someone will spot it and send help. Little does he know, this simple act will bring catastrophe down on his family. Tom pulls out a compass and map to get their bearings, but the compass is completely dead. It can't point in any direction. That is when Ben returns with 2 crabs he found nearby. Tom's blood runs cold. This species lives at depths of 500 meters, which means they're standing on the ocean floor right now. Why would the sea just disappear? Tom immediately digs out a backup battery, hooks up the radio, and starts sending distress signals on repeat. But the person who responds isn't a rescue team. It is a deep-sea researcher named Nao. Nao tells everyone that during their deep-sea expedition, the Earth's magnetic poles suddenly reversed, causing the ocean to flood the land. Only then does Tom accept that his family is trapped beneath the sea. Nao speculates that within a week, the poles will return to normal, and the seawater covering the land will recede back into the ocean. Their only chance is to reach high ground, but the nearest coastline is over 1,000 kilometers away, impossible to reach in 7 days. Tom asks if they can take shelter in the submarine. Nao doesn't respond. Julia grabs the microphone and tells Nao she is a doctor. If anything goes wrong along the way, she can help. Only then does Nao agree, transmitting the submarine's coordinates to Tom. Tom checks the map. The sub is 230 kilometers away, on foot. That is roughly a 5-day journey. There is no time to waste. The family immediately starts packing supplies. Just as they're about to set off, a stranger approaches from the distance, limping along with a dog. Tom assumes he is another survivor fleeing the disaster, and walks over to greet him. The man has an injured leg, so Tom mentions that his wife Julia is a doctor. But the man doesn't acknowledge a word. His eyes are locked on the water bottle in Tom's hand. Tom notices and hands it over without hesitation. The man snatches it and gulps it down greedily. But after drinking the water, the man suddenly attacks Tom. Julia rushes forward to stop him, but it is too late. The man picks up the harpoon and thrusts it viciously at Tom. Julia witnesses the horror, breaks down, and turns to run. The man hurls his spear, slashing her shoulder. Thankfully, it doesn't hit anything vital. In a world gone to hell, strangers are the greatest danger. Julia fights through the searing pain and makes it back to the yacht. Ben and Casey rush to help their mother inside, locking the cabin door tight. Julia tells the kids to hide in a wooden crate, hands Casey the flare gun for protection, then grips a knife and hides in the bathroom to tend to her wound. The attacker soon smashes through the cabin door. Inside the crate, the siblings hold their breath, not daring to make a sound. Starving. The man tears open canned food and wolfs it down, then searches the rooms one by one for Julia. He hears movement from the bathroom, pushes the door open, but it is empty. Julia had already slipped out through a hole in the bathroom wall. Luckily, it is a blind spot, and the attacker doesn't notice her. She thinks she is in the clear until the man's dog catches her scent and lunges straight at her. At the critical moment, Julia pulls out a dagger and kills the man's dog. Enraged by the loss of his dog, the attacker swears he'll kill her. Julia circles around to the side of the yacht, crawls through a hole in the wheelhouse, and plans to grab the kids and slip away quietly. The thug suddenly attacks Julia from the shadows, gripping her throat tightly. At the critical moment, Casey fires a flare gun at the attacker, but an open flame ignites the entire vessel. Julia immediately rushes the children out of the inferno. The 3 of them return to Tom's body. Ben and Casey break down in tears. Julia glances back. The attacker didn't die in the fire. He is dragging himself out of the wreckage. They have no choice but to swallow their grief and keep moving. Hours later, once they're sure the attacker isn't following, the family finally stops for a brief rest. Julia checks the map for their bearings. Ben is crushed by his father's death, barely able to function. Julia keeps talking to him, comforting him, until he finally pulls himself together. They walk until dusk, thinking they've lost the attacker for good. But when Julia raises her binoculars to scan the surroundings, she spots him, still trailing behind them. They don't dare stop again. They push forward non-stop toward the submarine's coordinates. Along the way, they find the wreckage of a crashed airplane and decide to camp there for the night. In the dead of night, Casey steps out to relieve herself, and a shadowy figure creeps toward her. Fortunately, Julia arrives just in time. At this moment, all she wants is to avenge her husband. She stabs the thug frantically with her dagger. The next morning, as the 3 prepare to set off again, they find the attacker's body torn apart overnight by some unknown creature, his face completely unrecognizable. Something far more dangerous is lurking in this wasteland. Julia doesn't hesitate. They move out immediately. Under the relentless sun, their drinking water runs out fast. Desperate with thirst, Ben tries to drink water pooled on the ground. Julia stops him just in time. Contaminated seawater will only make the thirst worse and breeds dangerous bacteria that could make them seriously ill. Spotting scattered seeds from the plane wreckage nearby, Julia decides to build a makeshift shelter to escape the brutal sun. They hunker down until sunset. Then Julia hears strange sounds outside. She steps out to investigate, and finally sees what those unknown creatures really are. She rushes back to wake Ben and Casey, and the three of them run for their lives. These giant crabs move terrifyingly fast, and the flat open seabed offers nowhere to hide. The group crests a ridge and spots a sunken cargo ship below, where several workers are sorting supplies. The workers see the swarm of crabs surging behind the family and scramble into a shipping container, refusing to open the door no matter how desperately Julia screams for help. The three have no choice but to climb on top of the container. In the chaos, a crab clamps down hard on Julia's calf. Masses of crabs pour into the damaged containers. The workers open fire, but once their ammo runs dry, they're all devoured. The next day, the swarm finally disperses. The three enter the containers to scavenge supplies. Julia picks up a radio from the ground and contacts Neo again. He explains that these giant crabs normally live in the deep ocean. With the water gone, they've lost their food source and turn to hunting anything they can find. Then he delivers urgent news. The water is returning ahead of schedule. They need to reach the submarine immediately. They're not far from the sub now, but during yesterday's escape, the map was lost. Now fires a signal flare to guide their path. They follow it, and 30 minutes later, the submarine finally comes into view. But to reach it, they have to cross through the crabs' nesting ground along a rocky cliff face. They slow their steps, keep their voices down, and inch their way through. Just as they're almost clear, the rock wall shudders and collapses. Debris rains down everywhere. Julia decisively pushes Ben and Casey outside, but she herself becomes trapped inside. Seeing his mother trapped, Ben is devastated and refuses to leave. Casey has to physically drag him forward. Their plan is to find Nio and get help. But Nio has been attacked by crabs too, badly wounded. In no shape to rescue anyone, Casey turns back alone to save her mother. Julia is fighting off the crabs by herself, and her ammo is almost gone. Casey arrives just in time and pulls her free. But the danger isn't over. The crabs burst through the rubble and close in behind them. Ben provides cover fire as Julia and Casey scramble up onto the submarine's hull. Now too badly injured to escape, is overwhelmed and consumed by the swarm. The crabs surround the submarine completely. The three dive inside and seal the hatch, still shaking. They peer through the porthole and see something even more terrifying. The three of them rush back to their seats, buckle their seatbelts, and pray in silence. The surging seawater violently batters the submarine, its hull nearly shattering. The three of them can only passively await whatever fate has in store. Sometime later, the three slowly regain consciousness. The submarine withstood the crushing pressure of the returning waves. Instead of sinking to the bottom, it was carried back to land by the surge. Staring out at the devastated city before her, Julia understands something clearly now. Worse than any natural disaster is the darkness that rises in people's hearts when the world falls apart.